Let's talk NBA Finals. It feels like it's been 6 weeks since NBA basketball has been on, but the finals start tomorrow. In fact, we're carrying every single finals game right here on ESPN 1320. Coverage begins tomorrow for game one between the Celtics and the Mavericks at 4:30. But to preview the finals now, coverage begins for us right now with Jason Timpf. He is the host of Hoops Tonight for The Volume. Check him out on YouTube. He's got stuff up there right now on Boston's offense, Dallas's offense. He's got a finals mailbag in there and his prediction. So Jason, we're not going to ask you for a prediction today. We're going to direct people to your YouTube channel to get your official prediction. You're welcome.
I appreciate you guys having me on. I'm excited to talk some hoops. I think this is going to be a fun series. It's been a little bit of a weird playoffs, especially because of how lame the Eastern Conference was. But if you had to pick a final, like this or Boston, Denver, or Boston, Minnesota, all would have been really good. And I'm just glad we got one of those three.
You mentioned the East being a little lame. Does that change anything for you and how you're viewing Boston going into this series?
No, I mean it's one of those things where it's a plot line here. Like obviously Boston had an easier pathway. I think the East, it wasn't just that the East was weak too. There were injuries. Like I actually think there were 5 good teams in the East. I think that a healthy Pacers, healthy Knicks, healthy Bucks, healthy Sixers, I think all 4 of those teams are on similar-ish tiers to or a tier, I should say, to those teams in the Western Conference. It's just the bottom of the East was atrocious. And so when those 4 teams all basically succumbed to injuries, it turned out that there wasn't a single team that could even hope to compete with Boston.
You know, Jason, I think one of the interesting things watching the Western Conference is it felt like every single round there was a bad matchup for somebody that caused the one team to win and another team to go home. Do you remember another point? I mean, sure, like no one knew how to defend Michael Jordan. He was a matchup problem for everybody. But in this one, it almost feels like Team A couldn't beat Team B, but Team B could beat Team C, and Team C could beat Team A, but they couldn't beat Team D. And it felt like the entire playoffs played out in this weird way where, again, Denver couldn't beat Minnesota, but Minnesota couldn't even hang with Dallas. And it just felt weird. There's a strangeness to this Western Conference.
Yeah, it's like a bizarre like reverse transitive property thing that's going on. What's interesting is when I was putting together my contender lists, I specifically mentioned from 3 to 10 in my list, which started, I had Dallas at 3. So I had Denver 1, Boston 2. And I thought those 2 were like a tier above the rest. And then I had Dallas at 3. And then I think I went like Clippers, Lakers, Thunder, Wolves, something like along those lines. And the way that I looked at it in my going into the playoffs, I literally said like 3 through 10, I view them all kind of on the same tier, and it's all going to be about matchups and who they catch and if their strengths and weaknesses kind of line up appropriately. It just turned out that Denver also had a specific matchup weakness, which was when you could match up with their interior size, and as long as you had a defender that could chase Jamal Murray around and make things tough for him, you can cause some problems for their offense. And they really, really dragged Denver's offense down into the mud for extended stretches of that series. But to me, it's just part of what makes basketball so fascinating is like, it really doesn't matter what you did in the regular season or what you did in the last series. It's like, how does your team match up with the team that you're playing? And I actually think that's a really interesting kind of initial way to look at the NBA Finals, in the sense that I view Dallas's defense as very much a load up the strong side type of defense. And what I mean by that is they don't have 5 great defensive players. They've got guys that do their jobs. Like, I don't think PJ Washington is a great defensive player. I don't think Kyrie Irving is a great defensive player. I think Derrick Jones is, and I think that their rim protectors are in specific, but even then it's like in specific ways. I think Daniel Gafford is a really good rim protector in a deep drop coverage when he's not playing against really good pull-up shooters. I think he's really good off the ball when he can sag off of a non-shooter in the dunker spot and just kind of hang out around the rim. But I don't think he's great in space. Lively, I think, is a great defensive player that can cover in space and cover at the rim. But those are really the only 2 strong points of the defense, really that point of attack role and that rim protector role. And so when you're playing the Clippers, who play a bunch of non-shooters, when you're playing the Thunder, who play some guys that are inconsistent shooters, when you play that Minnesota Timberwolves team there was like 3 guys on the floor at any given time that you could just sag off of, it really allowed Dallas to load up on the strong side and cause a lot of issues. Boston is literally the opposite of that on both ends of the floor too. Like offensively, they're very much a spread you out, test you with drive and kick. We're gonna we can attack your offense from every single angle, or your defense, excuse me, from every single angle. Whereas Minnesota really could only attack it through those same two entry points. Karl Anthony Towns looking to drive, Anthony Edwards looking to drive, with Gobert clogging things up in the paint. And so I view this as like the next matchup in that line, and it's one of the big reasons why I'm worried for Dallas. Is this is not the kind of defense that is built to guard the Boston Celtics. Ironically, you want a defense more like the Celtics, which is less on rim protection, but more on having four dudes who can all guard the ball. Like that, right. It's super fascinating to me. It's what I love about the game of basketball. It's why these things are so hard to predict. It's just every individual matchup is so different.
Jason Timpf, the host of Hoops Tonight on the Volume. We always talk about in a series, like, man, it's just going to come down to who has the best player. And for me, I think the Mavs probably have the best player in this series. But you just mentioned all the different role players for the Mavs and just kind of the way they have worked in unison to defend the teams that they've faced, and how that won't necessarily work against the Celtics. So is this a series where, with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown on one side, and with Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic on the other side, where the role players and Boston's superiority there might actually be the reason they win the series?
Yeah, it's more to me about like whether or not you are set up to stop their best thing that they like to do. So for instance, like when it comes to Minnesota, because of the fact that Luka was too big for all of their perimeter defenders, and because Luka was capable of kind of manipulating the Rudy Gobert in that rim protection position, and because one of the other important details too is like they consistently were able to attack the center and bring Lively and Gafford as rim rollers. Boston is probably going to put Porzingis on PJ Washington, which fundamentally changes the entire way they attack. Boston puts Tatum on centers all the time. They put Tatum on centers so they can switch those ball screens. And so one of the things that Boston can do is they can neutralize the vertical spacing of Lively and Gafford by just switching those ball screens. If PJ Washington rolls into the rim, he's just not the same type of vertical spacer that those centers are. And he's also, if he's popping to the three-point line, he's an elite corner three-point shooter, but he's a bad above the break three-point shooter. And so Boston is set up to slow down some of the things that Dallas likes to do. Is Dallas set up to to slow down some of the things Boston likes to do? No, not in my opinion, because of the fact that they have so many different ways that they can look to attack. I guess my guess is Luka's going to be on Drew. Don't be surprised if Drew is operating as a screener or even on the ball just a ton in this series to get the defense in rotation. And so Boston's going to be able to consistently get the defense in rotation and play their Boston Celtic drive and kick basketball, whereas I think Dallas is going to struggle a little bit just based on some of the things Boston can do to counter the way they attack. And so, again, I don't think it's fair to just look at role players, because these are two very different teams. Boston is like a weird kind of pseudo 5-star build, right? Like they got 5 dudes who, if they were all free agents tomorrow, who'd make over $30 million. But Dallas is 2 stars and a bunch of play finishers. These are guys who specialize in just catching and finishing lobs, or driving closeouts, or shooting catch and shoot threes. And so I don't think that's the way to look at it. It's more just, to me, in terms of the way the teams match up, Boston has some cards they can play to counter what Dallas does, and Dallas is a little bit more limited in that regard on the other end.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't think that the way that we saw Minnesota, basically Gobert got played off the court, or he became a problem for them. I don't see that there's a way that Dallas can like specifically single out a player, whether it's Horford or whether it's, Porzingis, because they have 2 great on-ball defenders, and then a bunch of other guys that are really, really good on-ball defenders as well. But how do you think that matchup with Derek White and Drew Holiday against Kyrie and against Luka, and not only that, but you're able to match up their 2 best offensive weapons with your 2 best defensive weapons, who just don't happen to be your best offensive weapons. So you're kind of able to send a couple of guys at their stars and have your stars maybe have a little more freedom.
Yeah, so one of the advantages with Boston is their ability to switch. Like, I actually do think Jaylen Brown will get the Luka assignment to start, but Drew Holiday will spend a lot of time on him as well. But Boston pretty much just concedes switches on every 1-4 type of action. Like, if Kyrie goes and screens for Luka, Drew Holiday, I expect to start on Kyrie. Drew will just switch right onto Luka, and Jaylen will take Kyrie, and they'll just kind of live with that, right? The thing is like they're not worried about that specific spot because Luka's going to have an advantage against everybody. I even looked at the tape, and even Tatum struggles to guard Luka. Everyone struggles to guard Luka. He's Luka Doncic, right? Exactly. And so the main point of function there is like there's a vertical spacing element that comes from rolling hard to the rim in a ball screen, and then there's a vertical spacing element that comes out of the dunker spot. And they're both very different. And if you can switch ball screens involving the center because of Tatum, that takes away the roll gravity piece that you get from Gafford and Lively. Whereas if it's in a dunker spot type of position, let's say that Luka's running a ball screen and he's bringing PJ Washington into the screen, Lively still has to be somewhere. Gafford still has to be somewhere. They're going to be sitting right under the basket, which is where Tatum's going to be. And he's this 6'9" freaky athlete that can make contests at the rim and clean up the defensive glass and all those sorts of things. And so, like, honestly, the personnel on Luka to me I think Boston knows they can't guard Luka one-on-one, but what they can do is they can force him to shoot shots over the top and at least kind of live with the results a little bit. They also have a ton of speed on the perimeter if they need to blitz or double and kind of rotate around. That's something that Boston does really well. It's so crazy because I even look at it like Derek White's going to guard Derek Jones Jr., and Derek White's one of the best rim protecting guards in the league. Like, he's just so good at coming over and blocking shots. And so, like, let's just be 100% authentic here. I'm not a huge fan of the Celtics team. I've never and there's a bunch of different reasons for that. I'm not a huge fan of the way they play. During the regular season, like when I'd have to cover them and watch them, I'd find them miserable to watch because they'd shoot, 47 threes and just there's so little value in each individual possession. And they're so much better than everybody that they don't have to play good basketball to win most of the time, too. Like that kind of thing really rubs me the wrong way as a basketball fan. Whereas you look at Dallas and it's like they have literally optimized and perfected this roster in like the best possible way, right? But make no mistake, it doesn't matter what we think about Boston or whether or not we like them or whether or not we think Tatum's the best. They just have a ton of talent, just an obnoxious amount of talent that can do so many different things on the court. And it just makes it a lot easier to win basketball games, to put it simply.
Yeah, definitely. Jason Timpf, host of Hoops Tonight on The Volume. How much? So I hear a lot about Kristaps Porzingis and how much Kristaps Porzingis matters to the Celtics. It looks like he's going to be available in some capacity for game one. How much does he matter in this series by being on the court?
So to put it simply, if you think about the construction of Dallas's defense, they have Derek Jones Jr., who's this really, really athletic, lanky perimeter defender. He's actually been really good. I'd argue he's been the best veteran minimum signing in the league this season. And then you have the second piece of your pick and roll coverage, which is the big man, right? Lively and Gafford. Lively, I think, is better than Gafford, but Gafford has his own kind of strengths there. That's the bracket, the two sides of the bracket of your pick and roll coverage. Well, against Minnesota, because Gobert is just such a poor roll man, because he's just not a guy that can catch and finish around the basket easily. Shot below 50% on layups in this postseason run, which is like putrid, right? Like they have all those issues, right? But when they've encountered other teams with shooting bigs, like, so for instance, when they faced Chet shot 22% from three in that series. Chet is not as good a three-point shooter as Kristaps Porzingis. Also, they could help elsewhere on the floor because of Lou Dort, because of Josh Giddey, because of Aaron Wiggins, Kayson Wallace, some of those guys, right? This series is very strange in the sense that Porzingis is going to be picking and popping, and when he's off the ball, he's going to be spacing, but above the break. And Kristaps loves to shoot it like 26, 27 feet from the rim confidently. And and so it's one of those things where like Lively and Gafford, their initial kind of instinct is going to be to protect the rim. And by the way, I expect Jason Kidd to say early in the series, leave Kristaps open, Let's see if he can make them. Because step one is see if the dude's going to choke under the pressure. That's always the first, because like if he misses 2 or 3 in a row to start the game and he gets a little nervous and he starts tinkering with his form, then it could go off the rails and then everything could be great. And we've seen that happen in NBA history. Look at, Harrison Barnes, look at Michael Porter Jr. last year, things like that. So like I think they'll leave him open to start. But if Kristaps hits a couple threes in the first quarter of game 1 and all of a sudden it just kind of throws Dallas out of their base defensive scheme, all of a sudden when you don't have that back line there, it puts so much more pressure on your perimeter defenders, which Dallas has like 2 of them that are really good, and Josh Green and Derek Jones Jr. And then like Kyrie can do it. PJ Washington can do it, but they're not great at it. And Boston's got a lot of talent. And so again, it's just, to put it simply, it's a spacing 5, but also in the context of a team where their top 8 players are all good shooters. So it's just going to just rip apart Dallas's help defense in a way that they didn't face in the first few rounds.
Poor Harrison Barnes.
Yes, shots fired.
Shots fired. Strays. Harrison Barnes has drawn a lot.
But Harrison Barnes is a good shooter. Like, that's the thing.
Yes.
Harrison Barnes is a good shooter, and like Cleveland took a risk. They left him open a lot, and it just paid off because he like. And I don't know if you guys remember this, but like, I mean, Kyle, I'm sure you do. Like, he was off, like way off. Like he was missing. Close. He was missing outside the rim on the majority of those. Like you could tell the moment got to him a bit.
Yeah, it was that was tough. It was tough for old Kyle back then. Last one for you. To you as a player, and I know this gets outside of the realm of film and breaking the game down like you do so well on Hoops Tonight, but does Jason Tatum have anything left to prove to you?
That's a loaded question because I already feel like we know what Jason Tatum is, which is probably the best of the non-top tier superstars, right? Like if you're putting him in that group with guys like Anthony Davis, guys like, I think Joel Embiid's kind of in this tier a little bit right now, although Joel I think has the upside to move out of that tier. I think just those guys that are clearly behind that Luka, Giannis, Jokic kind of tier. In that tier, I think Tatum has proven that he is probably the best of those guys. But it really is this simple to me. He's like a Swiss Army knife. He can do everything, right? But he's just not good enough as a shot creator in the half court to put himself on the level of the guys above, which is, in my opinion, the most important trait in sports. Like you have to be that type of guy, right? And so like I think Tatum's a little underrated by people outside of Boston because I don't think people understand how good he is as a playmaker, how versatile he is defensively, and him being kind of passive and selfless is actually perfect for this roster because they have so many good players. Like if like he would hijack possessions if he was a different type of guy, and that would actually hurt the team, right? So like he's a good fit there, but I think he's a little overrated by the Boston fans who I think want him to be included in that top tier, but I don't quite think he's there. I don't think he necessarily has anything to prove because he is who he is. Like even if he wins the title, and I'll ask this to you guys, even if Tatum won the title this year, it wouldn't make him the best player in the world, in my opinion. Would you guys feel the same way?
Yes, I would feel that way.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. I think I tend to agree with you. And that's why it's so tough because everything I feel like is so absolute now. This player is either great or they're trash. And if you're not winning the finals, then it's like, well, you have, then you stink. Like me, like I have Luka ahead of Jason Tatum, and I feel fine about that. And I feel fine about that if Boston wins in 4. Like I think that you probably hit the nail on the head with, like, he's largely underrated. But at the same time, like, that's kind of how it goes. Like until you win a title, you're going to be that guy that everybody's like, nope, can't get it done.
He's a good playmaker who's nowhere near as good as the top playmakers in the league. He's a mediocre pull-up shooter. He's a mediocre rim finisher. Doesn't have a great first step. His shot selection in general, I think, is atrocious. Like he settles for the pull-up jump shot on about like almost a half of his possessions, even though he's not good at it. and he hasn't been good at it for years. So like, if you really parse it down into those individual offensive skills, he's just not very good at those specific things. But like, it's just, you watch him and it's like, oh, Obi Toppin just tried to isolate him. That was a bad idea. Oh, they were able to put him on the center. Like, he's going to spend time on Luka in this series. Like, he's just so good at everything else that I think it kind of makes up for a lot of that.
Hoops Tonight on the Volume. Check him out on YouTube. He is Jason Timpf. He is one of the smartest basketball people I know. You're going to want to check out his coverage throughout the NBA Finals at the Volume. Again, that is Hoops Tonight. Jason, thanks so much for hopping in with us, man. And glad your Wi-Fi is working again. That is my literal nightmare, is my Wi-Fi suddenly going out overnight.
It was a little bit of a crisis, but we're through it. I appreciate you guys having me on. I'm looking forward to next time.
Sounds great. Thanks, Jason.